I've been playing Trek to Yomi.
Oh yes, of
So I
course. Come out.
next, James, what have you been playing?
I mean, I've played
Trek
a bit of Trek to Yomi. So are you? I mean, I wasn't enthralled by it. I take it you're not either.
It's okay. I mean, I think honestly, Trek to Yomi, if you don't know what it is, it's a samurai game. It's in black and white. It's sort of 2.5D. In fact, actually, it's probably 2.8D. There's a lot more 3D elements to it.
Yeah.
It's not like you're completely side scrolling. There are side scrolling parts to it, but there's still big parts where you can move around. You can go to completely separate paths and areas and stuff. There's a lot of exploration within that very limited viewpoint. And it's sort of an action game. There's no platforming. It's you're sword fighting people. You've got a block button which you could tap and do a parry. You've got
Hang on. Is the hook that it's really difficult though?
Well,
no, I mean it gets really fucking difficult towards
Yeah.
the end. Like it gets infuriating towards the end. I mean, I think I'm on the last level now, and there's
right.
bits in it that's so long that you know between checkpoints that you just start to get frustrated with it.
Yeah, I mean, because I'm not far in, and it's been very generous with checkpoint. I got to the first armored guy, Dave, and it was just
Okay.
like, yeah, and it was like, oh, just do like one of these combo attacks or whatever, and I was like, it didn't feel like it was working, and it annoyed me. And I turned it off.
No. I mean, the combat is, I would say, serviceable. It's not like the problem is you're doing so much of it, and it needs to be more than serviceable to be good. The hook and the reason why I've been playing it for longer than maybe I should have is that it just looks fucking great, man.
It does. It does.
Visually, it does some really interesting stuff with the monochrome visuals. It fucks around with lighting here and there. It brings stuff into the foreground that's really surprising later on.
I was going to say that, like very early on, yeah, there was some stuff I really liked. So you're like, yeah, your village is like being attacked, and you're looking at yourself, like, you know, sort of middle distance, like running down these streets, but the camera is going through the buildings either side of the street.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, and there's like people sort of huddled and like sort of peeking over and stuff, and like they're really sort of heavily blurred out, but they're sort of there, so they're sort of, you know, they're not obstructive, but it's just like an interesting detail and like an interesting way of doing it.
It constantly does stuff like that, and not only that, it can play with lighting at times where, you know, as we've seen in martial arts films, like that's a huge part of it, right? That you're not just seeing two people fighting on screen like you would in, say, a Western film. It does stuff where sometimes they're behind, you know, I don't know, some washing on a line or whatever, but the way the light's hitting, it's projecting the fight silhouettes into the foreground and stuff like that. It does all that stuff, and it does it really well, and that's kind of what's been driving me through. I just, you know, I think when you're asking people to use combat so much in a video game, probably make it a little bit more, you know, it's funny because I've seen a lot of people complain about the combat, and the stuff they're complaining about is irrelevant. Like, it's not what the problem is. The problem's not what buttons you're pressing. The problem's not what combinations you're using. The problem is that it doesn't, it adds to the combat throughout the game. Like, there's certainly different weapons that you pick up and different other elements to it, but it doesn't really reflect in the gameplay, and you don't have that sort of tactile connection with what's going on screen and what you're pressing. Sometimes it can feel just a little bit too detached from what you're actually trying to achieve, and that can become really frustrating.
It doesn't have like heft and weight. You don't feel really.
It's like there's a bit of latency, isn't there, Dave? Almost.
Sort of, yeah, but also that it's telling you stuff, and when you're trying it out, it doesn't really feel like it's telling you the truth.
Yeah.
So like sometimes it will say, you know, this is like basic example is this is a heavy attack, this is a quick attack, and then you'll go into the next fight and you go, okay, well that one's an armored guy, so surely I use my heavy attacks. But the problem with doing that is that the armored guys are faster than the others as well. So although the heavy attacks are slower, you're fighting an enemy that's slightly faster with their attacks, and you're like, I'm not seeing what you're actually asking me to do here. There should be a combination or a way of defeating each enemy type. And the interesting side of combat should be, how can I quickly take out these enemies in the right order using the right combination systems? Like, say, for example, the Batman games is very much like that. There's a button press for this type of enemy, there's a button press for that type of enemy. A combo is going to work really well on this one, not so well on that one, but they're very visually different. And even in this, they're not very visually different. You look at an armored enemy and a basic enemy, and sometimes you can just get completely confused by how much you need to kick their ass. And it doesn't really, like, there's some really good moments where you can do this sort of, when two people go to try and slash each other and then they sort of miss and then both turn around and they're facing each other again, but they've swapped locations. You could do that in this, right? But A, it's not clear when you can do that, and B, there's no real benefit to it. So it starts to slowly introduce maybe fighting more than one character at a time. And there are totally systems there to be able to turn around, do combos behind you, all that sort of stuff. But it never really goes to that next level. It never really sort of expands on that idea. It just goes, oh, you can do it. Right. Is there going to be a point where I really need to do it? Nah.
just keep parrying and slashing them.
So just I think, look cool, but there's no real benefit. It looks cool and it might feel cool, but there's no other real benefit.
There's no real benefit to doing that. And I mean, I think my ultimate takeaway from this game is that I think it's been treated incredibly harsh in some of the reviews and some of the conversations that I've seen about it online. And I feel that the reason for that is that there's been some really good games out this year. And when you're getting this game, which is probably a 6, a 7 at best, I would probably say it's more around the 6-point mark, I
saw a lot of 6s and 7s. Well, what is the main criticism overall, and why do you think that's harsh?
So I mean, I've seen it. I mean, you said it as well, Sean. So I'm not having a pop at you, but I've seen a lot of people say, "Oh, good, it's an action game where if you press the block button, you parry." Yeah, but loads of games do that, and it's not a problem. Metroid Dread did that. It's not a problem.
But then there's putting that in games that do like enough other interesting things that it's not really an issue. Whereas this felt like, oh, this is the main thing I'm going to be doing. Like that's how you beat everyone.
I don't know. That's but that's not what the conversation's been about. The conversation seems to be focused on other games do this stuff. Yeah, other games do this stuff, right? But that's not what the problem is with this game. There are problems with this game, but reducing it, boiling it down to such a basic criticism, I think does the game a disservice. Like there's stuff here to like, and it doesn't now, the combat, it doesn't, but as I say, it's serviceable. The problem is when you've got such a combat heavy game, it needs to be more than serviceable. So that's sort of my takeaway from it. I think if you like, if you're not too worried about like it's not that long, and it's and the difficulty setting can be turned down. So if you want to see something that looks really good and does some really interesting stuff visually, then I would definitely give it a go. One of a real criticism that needs to be raised: if you're using black and white graphics in your game, and you're relying on subtitles because it's all in a foreign language, don't use white text. It is unbelievable that they made that decision.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. A lot of the subtitles are unreadable.
To change that,
I don't know. I'll have a look.
There has to be, surely, like the ability to change colours.
But then by default,
that shouldn't be there by default.
Yeah, the default should be adhering to adopted standards. Like it shouldn't be a case of having to go into the menu, should it, and tweak it. But, yeah,
it's so bizarre.
Did you play Sifu, David?
I didn't know, but I think comparisons to that is pointless, really, because they're not even trying to be the same sort of game. I think obviously there's some martial art elements to both of them, but I think trying to compare the two doesn't really work. One's a very serious, very complicated combat system. The other one is clearly focusing on just making things look good, which again it can fail at, especially when it comes to animation. It doesn't quite nail that every time.
We should say again, like praising the way it looks, like, because obviously they're doing, so Ghost of Tsushima had the Kurosawa mode, which I thought was a bit rubbish. Like this, as a love letter to that kind of cinema, is more successful, I would say, by a long shot. Like the look of it is just brilliant, and because obviously part of the problem with Ghost of Tsushima is it's like, oh yeah, we're trying to like make it look like this one particular director's style, whereas actually the way the camera is pointing is quite an important part of directing. And because obviously this is a bit, obviously, you have control of your character and the camera sort of pans around accordingly, but obviously the developers have thought about the way the camera pans through a scene, and they've authored that themselves. So it does have, like, it's definitely closer to, aping like Kurosawa's style. And it should be applauded. Like, it's not just a case of like, oh, it looks lovely. Like, it's in terms of nailing that, sort of adhering to that style, like it is quite successful, but I just didn't enjoy playing it all that much, sadly.
Yeah, no, I'll get through it. I mean, I've enjoyed it enough to see it through to the end. As I say, I'm right near the end anyway, so I'll get through it. I just if you're only in the business of playing bangers, maybe give this one a swerve.
Yeah,
that would be my advice.
Who would really enjoy this? Is someone who wants just like a mindless but pretty action game?
I wouldn't say it's mindless. Like, you got to pay attention. I mean, to be fair, I played it on normal. There is a lower difficulty mode, isn't there?
Yeah, there's a enjoy the story mode.
Yeah.
I don't know how you enjoy the story.
The timing window on the parries is pretty generous, right? It's certainly not like Souls level timing. It's pretty easy, relatively speaking. But yeah,
that's right. Okay, that was Trek to Yomi.